For more on US race relations since George Floyd was killed, Joseph Williams joins us now from just outside Washington, D.C. He's a former senior editor at US News and World Report. Good to see you again, Joseph. Now, as we heard there, the BLM movement seemed like a formidable force when protests erupted around the country following the death of George Floyd. Of course, there were plenty of other examples of black people killed by police, but that was a marking moment. How have race relations changed since then?
They have changed significantly and not at all. Significantly in the sense that we're now more aware of systemic racism in the United States, not at all in the fact that a lot of the systems that led to that racism in the first place are still there. I'll give an example. Recently, a school district in Shenandoah, which is not too far from here, but it's in the Virginia Valley, part of Virginia, and it had two schools rather, one high school and one elementary school that was named for Confederate heroes. Now, shortly after George Floyd's murder, the school board passed a resolution decrying racism in all of its forms, and then quietly stripped the names off the high school and the elementary school, so they were just renamed for local landmarks. This past week, rather a week and a half ago, the school district returned the names of those Confederate heroes to those schools because the community saw it as an act of disrespect and turning their back on their culture. So while on the one hand we have some progress, i.e. the names coming off the schools, we have a backlash and still more progress to go with the names being returned and people not seeing any problem with that happening.
On the topic of schools, in fact, you know, the murder of George Floyd changed K-12 schooling education in many ways. Can you talk about critical race theory, what it is, and why this education tool has been so politicized since?
Well, here again, you have an example of progress that was made after the murder of George Floyd and sort of a backlash. Some people call it a white lash, where people start feeling resentment and decide to go hard in the other direction. Critical race theory is an academic principle at the college level that indicates that systemic racism is throughout the United States and that a lot of the laws and a lot of the structures and indeed a lot of the wealth of the United States comes from the practice of slavery or stems from slavery and Jim Crow and oppression of black Americans. Now, that theory is only taught at the college level, yet some schools in the wake of George Floyd were talking more openly about racism, talking more openly about structural and systemic racism in the United States. But years on, a lot of politicians, particularly in the advent of Donald Trump's resurrection, saw it as an opportunity to score some political points by declaring that these programs make white people feel bad. And any program that makes a child feel bad should not have a place in the classroom, even though those programs were based on history, based on fact, and in fact were attempts to try to reconcile and try to move forward on racial animus in America. So again, one step forward, two steps back.
What do you think it is about the political climate, either at the time or where we are now, about why that is threatening to such a broad group in the US? Why is it that learning about very, well-known subject matter, historic subject matter, is a threat to some groups here in the US?
Well, it depends on who you ask. I mean, a lot of academics, if you ask them, they'll say that it's a threat to the hegemony that's going on right now in the United States, that white superiority is being threatened, and that the United States' own image as a self-built nation, as a nation that's equitable to everyone, as the beacon of freedom around the world, will take a serious hit if people take these incidents and take these thought processes seriously. So it's a wound to our own national self-image if the national self-image is buying into this sort of era of freedom and self-determination, and that we're an example to everyone else around the world. That kind of gives the lie to, calling out racial systems and calling on the actual history of the United States kind of gives lie to that shining beacon image that we'd like to hold on to so dearly. But there are a lot of people who are working behind the scenes to make sure that those facts don't get lost, that in fact we do still keep talking about race relations in America, and that even though we have seen some backlash, progress overall has still been achieved.
So in 2020, President Joe Biden featured Floyd's sister in a campaign ad and was vocal about the prevalence of police brutality across the country. Here we are in 2024. Do you think race relations will be on voters' minds this November?
I think a lot of things will be on voters' minds. Certainly on black voters' minds, race relations is going to be a factor. We're 4 years on from George Floyd, and essentially the country has kind of returned to normal. I think pocketbook issues take precedent. I think abortion access takes precedent. I know a lot of black voters are still angry about the Supreme Court's decision dismantling affirmative action in college admissions. So I think for a certain segment of the electorate, that's going to be one more thing on their minds when they head to the polls. But we also do have a certain slice of the electorate that is kind of throwing their hands up with frustration. These are minority voters who feel like even though they gave Joe Biden a chance, even though it looked like we had a dramatic opening to make things different and make a change, are frustrated. And because of that, they're more willing to give Donald Trump a look-see, especially if he's going to affect their own individual issues, particularly from an economic viewpoint.
All right, Joseph Williams, really appreciate your time.
My pleasure.